Regret sucks.
I finished my first half marathon in 2 hours and 7 minutes. And I, again, had a goal and I didn't meet that goal. And I just, it's like, I could have pushed harder. Like I can think of various times during that run where I could have pushed harder, where I was messing up. I got mad because uh, my tunes stopped playing, right? Like Amazon Music let me down. And I actually stopped and walked to fix that problem. And I got done with the race and I was like, how much time did you waste messing around with whether or not Beyonce was playing? Like, this is dumb. Like, um, I've made choices in my life where I look back and I'm like, man, what if I had done that differently? I should have pushed harder. I should have, you know, it, once you take the easy way out, you don't take the chance, you don't take the risk. You'll never look back after we were talking about this a little bit last week in the room. When you quit something, I can't imagine a scenario where you look back 5 or 10 years later, unless it's something dangerous, right? Like you quit smoking, great. But what we were talking about specifically last week was seniors and senior spring. Well, I'm not going to row. I'm not going to do crew because it's my senior year and I want to enjoy the spring. 5 years, 10 years from now, are you really going to look back and go, man, I'm so glad that I did nothing my spring term and I got in one more round of, you know, frisbee or what? Like, what are you talking about? You're never going to look back and be like, oh, I'm so glad I quit this. I have a few of those moments where I look back and I'm like, why did I stop doing that? Like, I I didn't become better off because I quit that. I didn't become better off because I ended that relationship over something stupid. Like it, and it doesn't go away. Like it every so often it just churns back into your head. You're like, why did we do that? And you can't go back and redo it. Like there's no do-overs. So I think that's been my biggest thing is before I decide not to do something again, before I decide that, okay, I'm going to move on from this thing to this other thing, I have to have that hard conversation with myself of, am I going to look back and say, man, I wish I would have kept doing that? Is there any chance that I'm going to look back and say, boy, I'm really glad I quit that when I quit that? And maybe there are, right? When I made the choice to leave Mercersburg and come here, it was a big choice. I thought at the time that some things were going to happen at that school that I wasn't ready. I didn't want to have to suffer through it. 5 years later, all of that stuff had happened. And I got to look back and say, man, I'm glad I got out of that when I did, because I wouldn't have wanted to be there for all of that. So yeah, regret sucks because it never goes away. I think it's one of the few things that your brain just holds on to over and over again. So before you make a decision, especially about quitting something, you have to know that you're quitting it for the right reasons, because later on, that regret, it there's nothing you can do about it. And all of that time that you lost getting better at that thing, unrecoverable.
I feel like regret is inevitable no matter what you end up doing. Because let's say you have two choices in life. Do I want to move to Houston or do I want to move to Michigan? If you decide to move to Houston, you're always going to regret in your mind, what if I went to Michigan? And if you went to Michigan, you're always going to be like, what if I went to Houston? And obviously that's one example, but I think anytime you're making a decision, there's going to be some regret about the other decision. So the real question is, which regret do you want to live with? Because if you accept the fact that you're going to feel regret because it's just a human thing that no matter what you do in life, it's impossible to minimize regret, right? I guess in times in the past, I felt as if regret is something that we should like minimize, but you can't really change how much regret you feel. I feel as if that you can only change like what you regret. And if you're making a decision like my senior spring, let's say I quit crew versus let's say I decided to keep doing crew, and then finish my season, right? 10 years from now, will I regret the fact that I decided to continue crew, or will I regret the fact that I quit crew, right? And you play those out in your mind and you put yourself in the future and look back at yourself, and then you'll be able to feel like you can kind of get an idea what the regret will feel like. And then you can make a decision based on that. Because I think sometimes decisions are hard because there are so many nuanced factors and there's so many things to consider. And it's hard to picture an idealized life that if I had both of the outcomes, which outcome would I like better? But sometimes looking at it in a negative view, like which one would I regret more and which regret could I absolutely not live with? Go with that. And sometimes I have like desires that I want to start my own business, right? I want to start my own project. And I think this is an example of a project I want to start, right? But there's so many reasons why it won't work, right? There's so many reasons that like it may never become successful. I may never end up making money off of it. It may completely fail. So should I just completely not work on it at all? And should I just focus my time on getting my degree and getting a good job? Well, sure, I could. It'd be a safer decision, but which decision would I regret more? Would I regret the fact that I never tried it in the first place? 'Cause I always think in my mind, even if I'm going to work a normal job, I'd always think that, what if I actually tried it and it actually worked? Or would I regret the fact that I tried it and it failed? At least then I can live with that regret more than the other regret.
So there's a great distinction there. But I mean, first, if your choice is Michigan or Houston, it's got to be Michigan. That's a no-brainer. Um, there's a difference between, for me, it is the regret of things that I didn't do, right? And your example is a good one. There's a difference between I made a choice, like I've got to do one thing or the other, so I got to make a choice. For me, if I've done the list of pros and cons, and I've come up with, okay, this is the choice I'm going to make. That one, there will be no regret for me later on, because, and again, to your point, you're exactly right. All right, so I go to Houston and things don't go well. I should have gone to Detroit. There's no guarantee that Detroit was going to be better. Detroit might have even been worse, right? And that's my thing so often with like college acceptances. Well, I really want to get into this school, but I got into this school, and then I go to this school and it's not as great. That's because I didn't. No, you have no guarantee that. And there was a woman I just saw on an Instagram reel that was like, you get accepted to Harvard and Yale. You go to Harvard and it doesn't go well. Oh, I should have gone to Yale. Why? Like, what makes you think it would have been any better at Yale than it was at Harvard? For that matter, the University of Michigan or Mercer County Community College. Like, there's no guarantee that the path you chose was better. So my thing with regret is, when you got to that decision, had you gone through all of the steps to really make that decision? Or, and this is where the regret comes in for me, did you just do it because it was the easiest one? That's the one to me that I look back on later on and I'm like, that's the regret I can't live with. That's the regret that sucks. The examples you've given are all, for me, choices. And yeah, you're right. In those cases, okay, do I go take a shot at this thing? It's a flyer, but if I don't take this shot, and that for me, right? So I had a chance, I had a choice to take the safe route of going to college, or at the time, the much less safe route of going into the military. I chose the college route. I regret that I didn't take that flyer, that I didn't try it. And every once in a while it comes up and I'm like, man, I really wonder what would have happened had I taken that chance. I could have still gone to college after the fact, right? I still could have, and maybe would have ended up in exactly the same place, but I would have gotten this other experience that I now no longer can have, right? Firefighting's different. I never thought of anything to do with firefighting until it was well beyond the point where because of age, where I could have become a professional firefighter, a paid firefighter. So I have no regret in that regard. I just didn't know it existed. I didn't know the possibility was there until it was too late. No regret. But with the military and a few other things in my life, I did make a choice and I chose the easier path. And for me, all of those cases that I look back on and I say the decision was just about taking the easier path, I have regret, and that regret sucks. I now, looking back, would say if I'm ever forced with a decision, and one's a little bit risky is not maybe the right word, but one of them is a little more daring, I want to go with that daring one. I don't ever want to look back and say, I didn't do it because I was afraid. of taking that risk. So
Yeah, sometimes I feel regret as if I wish I started something sooner, right? But the thing is that there's no scenario where it was even possible for me to have started sooner, and some things like that you can't even regret something that wasn't possible.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I think a frame that's helped me now is that the present moment is a second chance. That sure, I look back at the decision I made, or even the decision I did not make, that I did not choose to go into the thing that I wanted to do. Well, I can do it today.
Yeah.
Right. And I guess there's always this notion that it's too late, which obviously I'm young, so I can't say that I have experience with things like that. But I have a feeling as if that is it really ever too late to start something? Because sure, there might be like physical limitations, but I think even looking at your story, that you started running like you said your 30s, right? 40s. I mean, you still made it happen, right? So I don't know. I hope that I can hold on to that as I get older as well, that the present moment's a second chance. Like just go out and do what you want today. Anyways, next one. If it's your job to eat a frog in the morning, it's best to do it first thing in the morning. And if it's your job to eat two frogs, it's best to eat the biggest one first. I've heard this one before, so let's talk about it.
So to your last point, yes, as you will find out, there are a few things that they draw age limits on. And so, yes, there are a few things where you're like, oh, guess I can't do that anymore. But for the most part, there's no reason. And even with those things, that if you're really, and firefighting is another good example, departments all over the country have an age limit, 35 years old. They won't take anybody. A guy in Philadelphia was 37 years old, took it to court, won. They had to put him on the roster to at least go through the training, right? So there's very, very few of those things anymore, but there are still a few things that like, yeah, the ship has sailed. The Mark Twain quote is one that it has taken me a long time, like embarrassingly long time in my life to recognize that when I wake up in the morning and I think about the things I've got to do today, my day will go way, way better if I just decide that the first thing I will do is the thing I want to do the least, like the hardest, most boring, tedious, like the biggest lift of the day. If I just devote time to getting that one out of the way, the rest of the day is a cakewalk. And I think more and more, it keeps coming up. Like it's usually not nearly as bad as I think it's going to be. And the feeling of getting it done and knowing that it's done is just like, that's the best feeling. And so it's taken me a really, really long time to wrap my mind around that notion that Mark Twain was right. Like if you have to do something that sucks, get it done first. And if you have two things that suck and one thing sucks even worse than the other, just get that one out of the way. And once you do, the rest of the day, the rest of the week, the rest of the month, they just go better. So, yeah.
I've always thought that time limits are what create anxiety. As if like if I have a presentation tomorrow, then I'm going to be really anxious about it. And we want to avoid that kind of anxiety. Which is why the notion of pushing back a test, that I have another week to study for it. I have my presentation, I signed up for the last one, so I have the most time possible. I'll be the least anxious. I found that it's actually the inverse of that. That I feel less anxious if I have something to do tomorrow that's due tomorrow versus I'm given all the time in the world to finish something. I have until next week to study for it. Because you might think that, you have the time to do, you'll deal with it later, but the anxiety is kind of or in your head building and it stays with you for the next week. Which is why that I think this year, in small moments, right, whenever we have a presentation or some sign up for something, I always sign up for the first one, right? And I get it done first. And then when people are still stressing for the presentation they're doing next week, I'm like, oh yeah, I finished that such a long time ago. It's like, I forgot it existed. And I think it connects to the point you're making now as well, right? Because if you have some big, difficult frog that's sitting in you throughout your day, and you're thinking about it all day that, you have to do that frog, I have to do that frog, I have to finish that task, I have to finish that task. Until you finish that task, your whole day will just be filled with this anxiety humming in the background of your mind. So I agree with it completely. I think it makes sense. I've also gone periods of time where I've tried to work in the morning also before school because I found that way I can just get it out of the way. And then my whole day is like so much more peaceful. I don't have to worry about the big nagging task of the day. So 100%. If you enjoyed that segment with Ryan Bennett, then you're going to love the full 2.5 hour length podcast. Make sure you click here to see the full length podcast and don't forget to like and subscribe for more.